God's Book, an honest look at the Bible's 7 toughest topics.
Welcome to our God's Book series. Today we begin with the first book of the Bible, Genesis, which raises the question of science and creation. There is a popular belief that the Bible contradicts science. The narrative goes something like this. In the past, natural phenomena were attributed to God because we didn't know any better. But now we know why seasons change and diseases spread and tides rise and rainbows form, so we don't need the Bible anymore. You know, the stories about the 6 days of creation, Adam and Eve, a great flood and a floating zoo, they're just for children. I wonder if you've ever felt the pressure to choose between believing the Bible or believing science. In part 1 of God's Book, I explain why I believe this is a false choice. When we understand Genesis in its original context, it still makes sense of the world we inhabit. So let me summarize some reasons why we need never grow out of Genesis, and then over to you to discuss. Genesis is not a modern scientific textbook. It was written thousands of years ago in an ancient culture that made sense to ordinary people who didn't have microscopes and telescopes to hand. But they were wondering where everything came from and what it all means. Back then, people weren't asking questions about atoms or evolution. They were asking who made the world and what is our place in it. One way to think of it is that science answers the how questions. How old is the universe? How does life reproduce? But Genesis answers the deeper why questions. Why are we here in the first place? Why is there intelligent life, beauty, truth, and justice? We need both of those explanations, the how and the why. In that sense, science has not undermined faith. Still today, over half professional scientists in the UK and the US believe in God. One of my professors had a PhD in biology and another PhD in theology. He gave me confidence that the two can work together to explain our world. Now, of course, our interpretation of the Bible may be faulty, and we may differ strongly over some of the details. Is the earth young, a few thousand years old, or is it millions of years old? Did we humans evolve from other species or not? We may disagree on the details, but we can agree on the big ideas that Genesis communicates. Firstly, God is our creator. Genesis opens, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." These famous words remind us that the universe had a beginning. Matter, space, and time have not always existed. So where did it come from? Science can't explain why everything exploded out of nothing, but Genesis can. In the beginning, God. Moreover, unlike other ancient myths in the world at the time of Genesis that claimed everything came from the chaos or violence, Genesis says God calmly spoke all things into being. We're not accidents. We're here on purpose and for purpose. Secondly, according to Genesis, human beings are made in God's image. Male and female are equal. Every human, rich or poor, is sacred because we bear the divine image. Then in Genesis 2, the stories of Adam and Eve actually focus on human relationships with nature, each other, and God. This isn't just biology, this is theology. When Genesis says it's not good for man to be alone, it's saying we need love, community, and relationship. Moreover, when God rested on the 7th day, it reminds us that we're not just here to work endlessly, we're here for rest and worship too. So rather than giving us a science manual, Genesis gives us a meaning manual, showing us who God is and who we are. As Psalm 19 puts it, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Next time you see a rainbow in the sky, remember science can explain how light refracts through raindrops, but only Genesis can explain why the world has elegant color explosions. That's beyond the laws of physics, don't you think? If nature is the canvas, the Bible introduces us to the artist behind all the beauty, love, and meaning. So no Christian has anything to fear from accurate science, and no scientist has anything to fear from an accurate reading of Scripture. Remember, things we take for granted are nothing short of miraculous. The fact that there is something rather than nothing, order instead of chaos. Conscious persons, not just inanimate matter. The more science expands our understanding, the more it requires a fuller explanation. Now, how does all this apply to us as we bring it into land? Well, today's culture is constantly training us to see the world a certain way. And that's why we need the message of Genesis. It tells a better story. In Genesis, God makes humans in his own image. So when you see a troublesome neighbor, that's someone who bears God's image. That's going to change how you deal with them. In Genesis, Adam and Eve are told to steward the creation on God's behalf. Understanding that is going to change how we use natural resources. They're not just raw material to be exploited. In Genesis, Adam and Eve listen to the voice of temptation and disobey God. Listening instead to God's good plan in Genesis will lead us to flourish in his ways. That's why I believe we should never grow out of Genesis. So as you go into discussion, be honest about the questions you have. The relationship between science and Genesis is not always straightforward, but they don't have to be enemies. Let's open our Bibles and explore this together.